Uganda Eyenkya.
Mr. Speaker, we will restrict ourselves to major issues on the budget framework paper and the areas of disagreement. The first area is non-compliance of the national budget framework paper with the law. The second area of disagreement is the suspicious domestic revenue figures. The third area is conflicting public debt figures. And then the fourth one is the reckless borrowing and wastefulness. The first area, Mr. Speaker, non-compliance with the law. Processing of the national budget framework paper is the most important stage in the formulation of Uganda's national budget. Framework in ordinary terms means foundation. If you are to compare budget to a building, the components here, you're talking about foundation, walls, beams, columns, and the roof. The materials required for the construction of the national budget framework paper are outlined in Schedule 3 of the Public Finance Management Act. They include a statement of revenue for the annual budget for the next financial year. This is a statement of the resource to be approved by Parliament and used by the Ministry in preparation of the budget for the next financial year. This statement, according to the law, Schedule 3, must indicate the following: the ceiling of the expenditure of government in the financial year, the flow of the investment of government in the financial year, and the ceiling on total budget funding from the petroleum revenue holding account in the financial year. The budget framework paper referred to the Committee on Budget had two ceilings. The first ceiling appears on page 18, and the Minister of Finance casually describes it as a preliminary resource envelope for the financial year. And they say is projected.
Procedure.
I rarely interrupt colleagues on matters of procedure or order. So, sorry, Honorable Ssemujju. I have heard the grounds the Honorable Member is raising, and I just wanted a procedural guidance from you, the Speaker, because my understanding of a minority report is that members of a committee disagree with the decision taken by the majority members, not an opinion that you hold, say, on the debt to GDP ratio, what finance is presenting. But my understanding is that a committee sits, takes a decision, but you differ from the majority. And if I can read the Rule 205 about minority report, that one, sub-rule 1, a member or members dissenting from the opinion of a majority of a committee may state in writing the reasons for his or her or their dissent. And the statements of reasons shall be appended to the report of the committee. So what I expected was the Honorable Ssemujju to say, majority of the members said this, but for us we differ in this way. But this is not what I pick from the Honorable Ssemujju. So may I be guided on whether the report is presenting is in compliance with what the rules expect.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Minister. To begin with, this is not Ssemujju's words, they are for the members who signed the report. Number two, on the introduction part of the report, he states that this is where they dissent from the majority report. Okay, because these issues which were presented in the budget framework paper, he felt the majority or the committee should have disagreed with what the ministry has proposed. But the committee agreed with some and disagreed with others. So now this is where the discussion now will be on the members to either agree with the assessment of the minority report or not when we reach at adoption stage. So usually it's very difficult to deny members a chance on the minority report. We might not be satisfied with the level of content, with the content that they're in, but it is difficult. It's a very, very thin line for the presiding officer. So let's listen to him, and then during debate, this is where we shall focus on Uganda Eyenkya.
Mr. Speaker.
And I'm happy, Ssemujju, you've come back smiling. The new requirement from Honorable Eyenkya.
Mr. Speaker, I only want to ask the Honorable Eyenkya to be patient. I am giving you the frame, then at the conclusion I'll tell you why we disagreed. But otherwise it will be a one-sentence report. We disagreed on this and then I sit down. And honorable members, the budget framework paper referred to the Committee on Budget. As I said, I had two seedings. The first seeding is of 52.7 trillion. The second seeding is 54.5 trillion, appearing on page 342. When this matter was brought to the attention of the Honorable Minister Musasizi, who strangely these days is doing the work of his boss, and is the one who has carried the budget framework.
Can you read the report, Honorable Ssemujju?
This is in the report. It is in the report. It is in the report, Mr. Speaker. The chairman of the Budget Committee, Honorable Patrick Isiaji, suspended proceedings of the committee to allow the minister and his team look for a solution when the matter of two seedings, which is a matter of law, was brought to their attention. They congregated in a corner of the committee room, and after a lengthy discussion conducted while standing, they returned to announce that they were now reducing the allocation of the 54.5 trillion by 1.8 trillion. This is the drama that you missed, colleagues who are not members of this committee. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members, Honorable Musasizi told the committee that the 1.8 trillion was being removed from the Treasury Operations Vote 130, which is debt servicing and management, that is allocated 21 trillion, nearly 40% of the entire budget. Honorable Musasizi, however, noted that this vote meant to service our public debt is statutory. He will later look into the budget, I think with a view to reinstate the money he was removing just to allow the process to continue. Right, Honorable Speaker, this Parliament is not allowed to raise the ceiling of the budget. Parliament is limited to reallocating smaller percentages because the biggest amount in the budget is statutory. Once the government has presented a budget framework paper containing the ceiling of expenditure for the next financial year, even the government is not allowed to casually and unnecessarily tamper with it. That's why it is in the law. That's why Section 13(6) makes it a requirement that the budget must be consistent with the budget framework paper. It is therefore our contention. Now, Honorable Eyenkya can listen. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, that just on this account alone, this level of fidgeting, the budget framework paper did not meet the legal requirement, and even the committee said so, to be approved by Parliament as instructed by Section 9(8) of the Public Finance Management Act. And what we are asking is simple. Let the government withdraw this framework and return formally with one that conforms with the law. Because, let me read, the Speaker will tell me to read. That conforms to Section 9(4) and Schedule 3, which require the inclusion of a statement indicating the government's expenditure ceiling for the upcoming financial year. This statement is supposed to be approved by Parliament and used by the ministry when preparing the budget. So our disagreement, the committee says, go ahead, the person is dead, but you don't bury because he has children. We are saying, no, a body must be buried. Number 2, suspicious domestic revenue figure. The reason the total budget is reducing, and this is important, the main reason the total budget is reducing by 1.4 billion from 52.736 trillion to 52.722 trillion is because domestic revenue will grow just by 285 billion, which is 0.9%. And the second reason is that donors are reducing budget support from 2.7 trillion to a mere 28.9 billion. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, we must be told what has happened to our economy. Domestic revenue, both tax and NTR, last financial year grew by 4.3 trillion, from 25.3 to 29.9 trillion, which is 17.3%. The previous year, domestic revenue had grown by 3.4 trillion, from 21.8 trillion to 25 trillion. Even during the lockdown period caused by the COVID pandemic, domestic revenue grew by at least 2.1 trillion, which is 10%, from 19.6 trillion to 21.8 trillion. It is not possible that an economy whose GDP is projected to grow from 5.2 to 6 will have its revenue grow by less than 1%. There is something that government is hiding from Parliament. Either all the previous figures about domestic revenue growth were cooked and they are now telling us the truth, or they want to do something fishy with our money. The table below illustrates the growth of revenue over a period of 3 years. What is possible is that they are deliberately hiding some 3 to 4 trillion, which they will later introduce as a corrigenda and distributed the way they like. They did that last financial year. As the budget committee was about to present a report on annual estimates, the Honorable Musasizi came running with documents that he had identified new money and even allocated it. This renders the budget process useless. First, they present you with a budget that is fully encumbered because of statutory obligations such as public debt, wages, and other essential current expenditure. They leave you with just about 1 trillion to adjust. And when you are done with that adjustment, they run to Parliament with corrigenda. The intention is to defeat Section 9, Schedule 3 of the Public Finance Management Act. This must be rejected, and finance must be warned never to do it again. The ceiling they gave us today should remain the same ceiling throughout the budget process once it is approved. Assuming revenue figures were to be correct, then this Parliament must also ask the following question. 1, if our revenue are going to grow by just 286 billion, why and who is government exempting from taxes? The Auditor General in his December 2023 report, page 178, queried tax exemptions amounting to 1.4 trillion granted to various companies. The stated purpose for this exemption, the Auditor General says, is even not met, yet the practice continues. The Auditor General also reports taxes amounting to $14 million, equivalent of 52.2 billion, not collected from refined gold exports. A total of 70,837 kilograms of refined gold was exported, and with $200 per kilogram, the government was supposed to realize at least 52 billion in taxes. And the reason in our view is because people involved in gold exports are close to the president. Their businesses cannot be closed down by URA the same way it does to other businesses. The Auditor General further discovered that tax on 22 mineral categories worth 72.4 billion of export was not levied by URA because there is no tax assessment and payment on the export of certain minerals. This Parliament also needs to examine reports of numerous business closures over taxation and declining aggregate demand in the economy. The most recent being BZK Poultry International Limited, companies such as ShopRite, Uchumi, Game Store, Nakumat, Pig Fair, Night Hill, Day, Biofarm have all closed shops. The Uganda Registration Services Bureau recently struck off the government register 186,000 companies because they have not filed returns for 5 years. This, coupled with the closure of several medium and small-sized businesses downtown, should worry this Parliament. All this may have impacted our revenue correction, but not to this tune that the Honorable Musasizi is reporting. Parliament is being taken for a blind date, which it must flatly reject. the budget framework paper must be withdrawn and a new believable one is introduced. If this parliament is inclined and it wants to approve it, at least it must insist that finance doesn't return here with a agenda in the short time. Conflicting figures on public debt. Honorable Speaker and honorable members, the government in the budget framework paper projects to correct 29.9 trillion, which is 56% requirement to finance next year's budget. The rest of the money, about 22 trillion, will be raised through borrowing, internally and externally. When you approve the budget framework paper and later the annual budget, it means you, Parliament, you have given the government advance permission to borrow, because you have said, they have told you this is how we will finance the budget. So they will come here waving a loan request and say, but you approved the budget. Unfortunately, at this stage, Mr. Speaker and honorable members, the government deliberately is not disclosing all of the sources from which it will borrow. But immediately the budget is passed, this NRM group will be in the domestic market looking for someone who can lend it first, 9.455 trillion to finance 17% of the budget. They will return. That's how they had shamelessly ended up at the doorstep of Amarogo Capital Limited, a Kenyan money lender last financial year. It is this parliament that stopped this embarrassment. They will return to the same market to look for 4.116 trillion, representing 7.8. They will also borrow another 8.876 trillion from external sources to finance 16.8% of the budget, bringing the total borrowing or debt to manage to about 22 trillion, representing about 43.2 budget financing. It is therefore important for Parliament to know the status of public debt and our ability to repay before you approve borrowing as one of the sources of funding the budget. The Minister of Finance puts the public debt at 86.7 trillion. The Auditor General in his report to Parliament says the public debt is 97.499 trillion. And Bank of Uganda puts it at 88.8 trillion. To arrive at the figure of 97.4 trillion, the Auditor General reports that debt stock has increased by 111% in the last 5 years, from 46 trillion in 2018 to 97 trillion by 2023. This financial year alone, we have so far grown the public debt by 9.3 trillion, which is 10%. Because in June 2022, it was 86.8 trillion. Growing the public debt burden is one area where the NRM has excelled and registered unenviable and disputable growth. Sometimes, honorable members, you need to know this government borrows for fun. For example, Auditor General on page 45 of his report says that 14.5 trillion loans borrowed remain unutilized and dispersed. The explanation given to the Auditor General by the Secretary to the Treasury is unreadiness of projects at loan grant contracting stage, delays in fulfilling both disbursement and effectiveness conditions, poor project management, absence of counterpart funds, and slow land acquisition. Before they do this, they are in the market borrowing. For God's sake, if your project is not designed, why do you borrow money? Can you imagine? We have been fined 5.5 billion for cancelling a loan we picked from AFD and KFW to finance the Musizi hydropower plant. It is our considered opinion that before you approve the budget framework paper, you need to know the total amount we owe our lenders. Domestic areas. There is a tendency to exclude money owed to local suppliers of goods and services to the government from the total public debt. I think the intention is to make it look smaller. The Auditor General puts the total domestic area to 5.9 trillion. Minister Musasizi, in the budget framework paper, puts it at 2.7 trillion. This is the money the government owes its suppliers of goods and services. This amount increased by 31% from 4.5 trillion in the last financial year to 5.9, according to the Auditor General. Shockingly, only 217 billion is being provided in the next financial year's budget to clear domestic areas. As if civil society put it, it will take this government, which will not be there, by the way, 35 years to clear domestic areas without having to incur new ones. Like what has befallen many NRM promises, even the commitment control system, which means you contract only what you have been given, has collapsed. And with all this revelation, you can hear ministers and their technical staff declaring that the debt is sustainable. You owe local suppliers 5.7 trillion. You are budgeting 200 billion, and you are celebrating that the debt is sustainable. You cannot pay suppliers, you cannot pay all of the interests, you cannot repay external debt, and for them the economy is doing well. We are lucky, Mr. Speaker and honorable members. Our president is guarded by thousands of special forces. One of these days, debtors would have handcuffed him and taken him to Kitaria prison as the CEO of a company that has failed to pay them. Debt repayment burden. The biggest burden the country faces is interest payment, especially on domestic debt. Imagine 14.5% of our budget, equivalent of 7.6 trillion, will be used to pay interest on loans next financial year. In the year 2022-23 financial year, we even, according to Bank of Uganda, failed to pay all accumulated interest. That's why the money required to pay interest rose from 4.6 trillion to 6 trillion this year that we are in, to now 7.6 trillion. Bank of Uganda, in its December 2023 State of the Economy report, says interest payments and principal payments are exerting elevated pressure on tax revenue, to the extent that for every 100 shilling collected, 32 is used for debt repayments. The Auditor General notes on page 43 of his report, interest to revenue benchmark has been overwhelmingly breached, as evidenced above. It has been noted that 25% of the revenue collected is used to service just interest alone, 25% of the revenue collected, not principal. Last financial year, we failed to service our external debt, and as a result, the Bank of Uganda encroached on our reserves, reducing them from 463 million US dollars to 3,628.8 million US dollars. The Bank of Uganda is demanding for about 1.4 trillion to restock the reserves, which Musasi's will present as recapitalization. They know the good language. This financial year, the demand was 1.5 trillion. It is a vicious cycle that every year you can't pay. Bank of Uganda comes to pick money. We are so burdened that government has put aside a whole 20 trillion, which is about 40% of the total budget for debt servicing and management. Even if the total budget doesn't grow, the debt for it continues soaring. This year, the requirement for debt servicing is about 16.5 trillion. This year we are in, which is growing to 20. The withholding of donor funding because of human rights abuses is rendering the country vulnerable, resulting to non-concessional loans for recurrent expenditure. In the past, we have been borrowing to fund major infrastructure, but we are now borrowing for all sorts of things, including wedding anniversaries and for our revolutionary leaders. Last financial year, we borrowed 739 US million from Stanbic Bank and Standard Chartered at non-concessional terms to fund expenditure such as wage and administrative activities at a high interest rates, whose repayments are in the short term, according to the Auditor General. The last part, Mr. Speaker, will be unavoidable expenditure. The colleagues with whom we have signed this paper, and the others will present, we are also uncomfortable with the resource allocation. The budget for health, agriculture, and education has been reduced. At the very minimum, at least, it must be maintained by making deductions in areas where a lot of wastage takes place, such as State House and the President's office. Flawed allocation of the little resources the country has is what we must collectively and carefully as the Parliament seek to address when processing the budget framework paper. There are people in this Parliament who claim to love Mr. Museveni more than Dr. Besigye, who tweeted him when they were fighting in Luweero. Even if you are one of them, you cannot justify the president keeping 266 vehicles at his residence, State House, 400 vehicles under his office, yet the total number of ambulances in public facilities is just 178. The convoy of the president alone has 69 vehicles, as the table below shows. I don't have to go through this list. It is provided in the presidency budget framework paper. You can see it. 69 vehicles for our revolutionary leader, leading a country that has no ambulances. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, can you justify the president employing 761 staff in his office, 996 staff at his residence? Our leader employs at his residence, at taxpayers' expense, 51 cleaners, 62 cooks, catering officers, 80 gardeners, 29 housekeepers, 10 dobby and round area attendants, 106 private secretaries, 14 room attendants, 22 presidential assistants, 59 waitress and waiters, and at his residence he has 14 presidential advisors. He also has another 86 in his office. You can look at that list of all names that they are advising the president. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, look at the staffing levels. I have provided a table. We have provided a table there of Mulago. Just Mulago Intensive Care Unit. Mulago Intensive Care Unit require 82, and this is just some sample. ICU critical care nurses, they have only 9. The president has 59 waiters and waitresses. The ICU unit requires 45 nurses, nursing officers. They have only 4. The president has 106 private secretaries. The ICU unit at Mulago requires 28 specialist doctors. It has only 3. Our president has 22 presidential assistants. As a result, the intensive care unit at Mulago, with 28 beds capacity, only 14 are functional due to lack of adequate staff. Consequence of flawed resource allocation. For 38 years, which we have been told in this parliament will be celebrated, we have remained one of the leading exporters of maize to the Middle East. Why? It is because of the casual and leisurely way in which this government has been handling our economy. Can you imagine? We don't have a governor for the central bank for 2 years. The consequence of the NRM's fraud expenditure priority is the widespread poverty in the country. In its 2022 multidimensional poverty report, the Uganda Bureau of Statistics has put poverty levels head count in the country at 42.1%. The highest concentration of poor people is in northern Uganda, according to National Bureau of Statistics reports, at 63%. The north is followed by the east at 45.7%. In the north, the Karamoja sub-region, whose Mabat was stolen by NRM ministers, is at the top with 85% levels of concentration of poverty. Acholi sub-region is at 64%, West Nile is at 59%, Rango at 57%, Teso at 57%, Buganda North is at 30%, Buganda South at 18%. Kampala is at 0.4%. I am concluding.
Allowed me to raise the procedure point. Right, Honorable Speaker, the reason why I had raised the procedure point, and I respect your guidance, is that the public is watching us, and the people now know what our rules speak about. Yes, I am not disputing whatever he's raising. But for clarity, some of us have been in this house for quite some time. what is envisaged under minority report is that the minority members respond to what the majority members have put. We listened attentively to the report of the majority. Those lists of vehicles, issues of State House were not there. So, Right Honorable Speaker, is it procedurally correct that even when we want to please our voters by raising political sentiments, that we stick to what the rules require us to present in this House? Yes. Yes. No. Yes. That's the procedural guidance I want, Right Honorable Speaker.
Minister for Finance, I just needed to be guided. Because we are on the budget framework paper, I need to be guided where this information, okay, these issues, whether it was provided for under the budget framework paper, that you're going to fund all this and all that. If I could get guidance, then it helps me. No, from the Minister for Finance, not Shadow Minister. No, he's the minister. He's the substantive Minister for Finance. So.
Mr. Speaker, sir, all the information regarding this process is contained in the book which I laid here. I would like him to confirm whether, no, I know what I'm saying. If we can ask him to confirm.
Is the honorable colleague?
Yes.
Yes.
Honorable Ssemujju can tell us the page, can make reference to the book where he's extracting information from. And then.
Honorable Ssemujju? and smile.
I am surprised, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Musasi, who prepared this document, now he wants to disown it. He's now asking me to show him where the money, because you see, if you want, go to the security and governance program, you will see the sectors that are there and the money that you have provided yourself in this report. If you can allow me a second and conclude, because I'm concluding, I'll give you the specific pages. Because I don't want to disrupt the flow of my reading. But I will show you in 5 minutes where you have allocated money to the presidency and State House in this book. Mr. Speaker, this new report by the Bureau of Statistics looks at poverty not just in terms of the ability to access basic needs, but also access to other social needs such as education, health, and building materials. Programs to get people out of poverty are what we must concentrate on as a parliament instead of concentrating on fighting for the little that is available. We must immediately change expenditure priorities. The minister now is disowning that in this book there are expenditure priorities. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the budget framework paper raises significant concerns and violates the Public Finance Management Act Section 9 and 4 by omitting a budget ceiling as required. The budget framework paper for 2024-2025 further presents conflicting resource envelope figures, undermining its credibility. The lack of accurate revenue projections, conflicting public debt figures, and extravagant public spending, as highlighted by the excessive use of vehicles by the President, reflect a broader issue of transparency and accountability within government. The recommendation to reject the Public Finance Management Act and demand that a correct version with a budget ceiling is justified, as it aligns with the need for accurate financial information and responsible fiscal management. Additionally, addressing the disparities in public administration and prioritizing essential services over lavish expenditure is crucial for the well-being of the country and its citizens. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much. If you allow me 5 minutes, I am going to peruse the report and show the minister before I leave here. Just 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Uganda Eyenkya.